Hello and welcome to the PhD Life Raft podcast. I'm Emma Brzezinski and today I'm talking to the wonderful Rebecca Suart. We're talking about the PhD and menopause. We talk about brain fog, we talk about HRT, and we also talk about cake. So I do hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, Rebecca.
Oh, hi, Emma.
I am so looking forward to this conversation. It is such an important topic, the PhD and menopause, close to my heart. But before we get into that, I always ask people to tell us a little bit about themselves and their own journey. So can you tell us a little bit about you, about your PhD, and about what happened afterwards?
Yeah, so I started my PhD in my 40s. I went back to education early 40s when I was having a bit of a career gap with my second child. But prior to that, I'd worked full-time in further education, teaching students, managing curriculum, managing departments. So I was very much in the delivery, working with young people and working with adults, which is how I came about my topic. So I started a bachelor's degree in when I was 40, and I had thought, yes, I think I'd like to go back into teaching, but I'd like to teach primary school children. So I had a master's, but I didn't have a bachelor's degree, and that's what I needed to get onto the course. So I spent 4 years doing a part-time degree, but while I was there, I got the bug for research, which I hadn't anticipated, and I loved the topic. And I loved the broadness of the topic, which was basically education and sociology. But something, it converged with, I had started this degree, which was about education, but there was a mix of students who were, classical age, undergraduates, and also a lot of students that had done 2+2 degrees and battled their way through university, and maybe quite a few of them were teaching assistants or looking to go into child play therapy or become children's nurses. And I noticed I'd been doing a project with a professor at the university on work experience on education degrees, and as part of that we went out and we did interviews with students and professors about their journey into work experience and through their degree. And I noticed some things that chimed with other things that I'd been concerned with in my role in further education. Hopefully this is easy to follow.
Yeah, we're with you.
But when I worked in further education, I taught a lot of adult women that were coming back into education, a bit like the 2+2 students on my degree course, my peers really. And I noticed how some of these women come back into education thinking, yeah, I was teaching a vocational subject. They think, yeah, I'll come back and I'll do this course, my kids will be old enough and I'll be able to go back into the workplace and I'll have a job where I can work for myself if I need to, work around the school hours, etc. But I noticed in comparison to the younger students, very few were going straight into work or into the work they were training for, and maybe, and quite often, they were going on to do further courses because they got the bug for education. And when I was doing my degree, I noticed a lot of the older or part-time students weren't going into the jobs or the higher level jobs that they had aspired to when they came to university. And so that gave me the idea for my PhD, really, which was at a time when austerity measures had hit adult education so badly. And I know universities have suffered, and further education colleges have definitely suffered from this. And there are much less opportunities for adults to go back into education without the debt associated with that. And I wanted to really explore, given that there was been a massive reduction in student numbers, why some of these students were still aspiring to go through further education and on to higher education or into work, and really what motivated them to do that, given the amount of difficulties they would face with all the structural constraints around them. And I chose to focus on adult women because those were the women those were the students that mainly I'd taught, and I'd noticed how much they gain from education, even if they don't go into employment, and how much the narrative is around, if you're not going into employment, then education isn't valuable, right? But they were gaining so much more from education than that. And a lot of them had come from very difficult situations. So I did a study on a really diverse group of women and followed them through their course to find out why they've returned to college, what they were hoping to do, their journey into college, and where they were hoping to go on to afterwards. Some of them have since finished their degrees, which is lovely, gone into work, but quite often not doing what they set out to do, but still gaining nonetheless. So that's not a very brief introduction about what my PhD was about and how I got there, but you can see how it all interrelates.
Yes, absolutely. And then, and having done that PhD, what happened next for you? Just to get an idea of where you talked about how you're very generous spiritedly talked about how the women in your study have done. What happened for you?
Yeah, so for me, obviously I'd had a gap from the workforce, like the women in my study. I mean, there was more convergence than it kind of imagined.
Yes.
And so I'd done some teaching alongside my PhD at local university, a Russell group, and, then found it really hard to get a job, even though I'd got publications, because I think my topic isn't HE and it isn't schools, it's kind of one of those less popular topics. So I found that really quite difficult, and that really did have a massive knock to my confidence. I know it's not unusual. I read the stats, and I did begin to regret doing the PhD. I thought this is like an albatross around my neck for a bit. And then I became aware. Then I started to think, well, you could do research anyway. You don't have to do that. And do you really want to do sort of casual teaching, in place of having a proper job where you got a chance of getting some pension? I know that is under debate and discussion. So I needed to get back into the workforce, and I was bored. I'll be honest, my brain was going dead. And without the PhD there to motivate you, it's quite hard to do the publications.
Yes, absolutely.
So I became aware that the civil service take on government social researchers, and they take on, statisticians for the ONS. Well, I'm a qualitative girl. So I applied for numerous jobs through them. And I spoke to various people that worked in the civil service and said, look, if I start out in, I don't know, a government department that's maybe not in my area or in my sphere of interest, what are the chances then of me moving across to somewhere else that I'm like quite fancy, like education, for example, or, you know, something to do with leveling up maybe. And that everybody has said to me, once you've done your probation, there is chance. So I managed to bag myself a job as a social researcher in the Crown Prosecution Service, doing some really interesting and taxing work, heavy duty work, requiring a lot of, you know, interpersonal skills, broader skills than the PhD in dealing with, you know, a different kind of way of working and getting through the layers of management and convincing people that we should do this research, and, you know, convincing them of your ideas is quite challenging, but good as well. And so I've been doing that for 5 months and I'm really enjoying it.
Awesome.
Yeah, so
awesome. And I love hearing people's stories, and I know that listeners love hearing people's stories in terms of where the PhD takes people, because it can take you in all sorts of directions. And it sounds like for you at the moment, there's a bit of a ... on what happens next. So you might have to come back. But before we start planning the next episode, we want to get into this one, because you very generously said you'd be happy to come and talk about the PhD and the menopause. So let's get into that. How was it for you? This was something that was your lived experience. So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think I started getting menopausal symptoms maybe when I was 42. So maybe when I was doing my bachelor's degree, I felt a little bit more rageful, should we call it? You know, but it coincided because I've got an older child. She's in her, you know, later 20s now. I feel really old. And then I've got a teenager now. So I had a teenager at the time ish and a new child, like a little one at reception, you know, in reception, in primary. So I didn't know whether it was just, you know, doing a bit of work on the side, you know, having kids of different ages, being older. Yeah, I didn't know whether it was that. But gradually, as I progressed into my PhD, I had to do a master's in the first year, and I was fine through that. And then, and I've suffered with endometriosis lifelong, so I'm no stranger to having been tampered with hormones, to be honest.
I'm so sorry to hear that, because that is a tough journey on its own.
Yeah, and having to have, you know, things that put you in the menopause. So but that is very immediate and very severe. And so I think it was maybe I'd done my first year and I'd done my data collection, and I was maybe in my writing up year or halfway through, and I started to get really, you know, basically I was having a permanent period. I was feeling really like low, and my confidence was really fragile, you know. So I did my, when you do, I can't remember what they call it, but you have your end of first year, it's like conversion, you know, are you good enough? And honestly, the lady, the professor that did my interview, she asked me challenging questions, absolutely prepared me for my viva, but I found that I was taking things very personally and, you know, fretting and becoming much more anxious. My PhD was 50 miles away. So I didn't go into the office every day, but then when I had to go to meetings, I found that driving became more challenging. And I was getting stressed and anxious about driving places, being late. I've never liked to be late. So that kind of, you know, intensified. And then I had some surgery for my endometriosis. And then after that, started, the menopausal symptoms I felt were much worse.
Right.
And it got to the point where I was waking every hour. I wouldn't say it was a hot flush, but I was waking every hour. And I breastfed both of my kids, and I can only liken it to that feeling where you wake in the middle of the night and you're feeding and you think the world could end because your hormones are a bit weird.
Yes,
and it was like that.
Yes.
And
no, I hear you. And I think this is the thing, isn't it? That we talk a lot about the physical aspect of the menopause, but actually the thing that hit me the most was that night waking anxiety, which is absolutely devastating. It makes you feel like you are going mad. I absolutely can relate to that. And I think this real emotional impact of that, absolutely absolutely hear you on that.
It was hugely difficult. So I went to my doctors. I burst into tears, and she was lovely, and she she sent me for some tests, and she said, look, I think I was 46 or 47 maybe. She said, I'll send you for these tests. They're not going to really tell us a lot, but we just check your levels for other things before we go ahead. And then she basically said, look, probably better to have a bit of a gap from your PhD. And luckily her husband had done a PhD, and she said, I know what it's like. He sat in a room on his own for 4 years.
Right.
I think and she said he got really depressed. And she said, I cannot imagine doing this in your situation. So she was I just landed, and I know many of my friends have had to go through all kinds of scans and tests and, back and forth. A lot of them have gone privately to get support, which is absolutely gives me the rage.
Yes. No, we were just talking before we started recording, weren't we? Most of my friends have had to fight to get any sort of medical support. But I'm so pleased. I love the good news stories. I'm so pleased that she was there and she was able to support you in that. How fantastic. Hooray for her. So they put me on it, and I on the HRT.
And I immediately started to feel better.
It's miraculous. It's miraculous.
The difficulty was, I said to my supervisor, look, I think before I had my surgery for endometriosis, I feel like this, I've been going back and forward to the hospital, meaning the gynecologist, but I didn't say that. And I feel that something's not right. I'm really struggling to concentrate. They were, they were testing, and, they thought that they'd found something in the cervix. And so they were a bit worried about what that was. And so I had to go and have additional tests that I really hadn't bargained for before that. And then I'd already said to him, I'm having these tests, and he's like, oh, anything you need, just, but that was a bit embarrassing, I thought. And he said, tell me as much as you want. And I really liked him, but honestly, it was just embarrassing. I think his wife was a similar age to me as well. So I don't know whether he filled in the gaps for everything. But it was just totally embarrassing. And then when I've been to the doctors and things, I'd had this surgery, took a couple of weeks off, gone to the doctors a couple of months after that with the really bad symptoms.
Yes.
And I had to ring my second supervisor, who I rarely was in contact with, a lady a bit younger than me, and she was lovely, and I was a bit hysterical. And I'd spoke to the student wellbeing, I was a bit hysterical there, and she said, well, I can speak to your supervisor, your second supervisor. And I said, no, I'm nearly 50, I should be able to have this conversation, And then I managed to have the conversation. And my second supervisor said to me, I said, well, what are you going to say to him? And she said, I hope he never listens to this. What I'm going to say to him is I'm going to do that. I can't remember the comedian's name, where they're over the fence and he gets his arms crossed around his chest and they have the conversation. She said, I'm just going to have my arms crossed and just say it's ladies' problems, and he won't ask a single other question. And he didn't. And then when I went back, I thought, oh gosh, I only had 7 weeks off, but I thought, oh gosh, it's going to be really awful. And I just said, I'm coming back next week. I really don't want to talk about it. Everything's fine now. Look forward to meeting you. And because I just thought, do not say anything to me, because I just can't cope. And I really liked him, but I just thought, no, I can't do it. I can't do it.
It's very difficult, isn't it? It's very difficult, because in an ideal world, we'll all be able to discuss these things and we'd be able to be very, clear and open. But actually, we're still culturally, we're just still not really into talking about these things.
No.
And people don't know how to handle it. And the thing is, even though we know it's going to happen, certainly my experience of coming into menopause is like, what is this? What is this?
Yeah.
So you don't really know yourself. So this sense of being able to kind of articulate it to somebody else then becomes a real challenge, because you're not even really sure which way is up at that point.
Yeah.
Really difficult.
I mean, I did have to take the time off because, as I said, I was not sleeping. And so my second supervisor said, look, if you're not sleeping, you cannot function. And then I was crying. And luckily, I've got a great group of friends, and they've all got dogs, and they take me out on these walks and make me freezing and dirty. But, they give me a good talking to, which is great. And so that, my good friend said, look, you need to take some time off. Yeah.
Well, how brilliant that you have got those people around you, because that is really important this time. And I certainly, I really value my friends right now in this situation around me, and being able to talk through and go, is this happening for you, and what's that? So kind of certainly recommending people. We always say on this podcast about how important your people are. I think in the menopause, doubly important. So you took some time out, and was able to get was that when the HRT started and you started to get back a bit more on an even keel?
I know this sounds cliche, but the minute I started I felt better.
No, me too. It was within a week. Different person.
I think a couple of days, and my friends were like, oh, actually you're quite scary now because you're like back on form.
Yeah. That is the thing, isn't it? Because you feel like you've lost yourself, and then you go to kind of find back. So so I think if people are listening to this, and because I was always of a thing of like, oh, I'm never going to do that.
100%. I in some of the work I've done, I've worked with women who are recovering from breast cancer, and so if you'd have asked me 10 years ago, I'd absolutely never do it, because I'd read all of the stuff, the old research that has unfortunately, been prevalent in the media.
And there's now lots of questions around it. So if that is something that if people are listening and that is something that they've kind of taken, you might want to go back and just ask some questions of that now.
Yeah, and that's what I did. I did, as any good researcher would do. I did all my research, and I decided that yes, I was okay with it. I was a bit scared to start, probably, but then once I felt better, I thought, oh my gosh! And now, if you said to me, your doctor will take you off it after 5 years, which they were originally threatening, I'd say no. You can take it. You can take it off me when I'm in the coffin, because I'm not giving it up.
There was that thing, wasn't there, where there were shortages. I really got a bit very, very worried about it. I was like, you can't take this away from me.
Yeah, same. And I've had issues where I can't get it. So I am all over that, making sure I get it in time. Honestly, it sounds awful.
No, I'm with you, and I totally understand. So if people are experiencing symptoms, I think this sense of going and asking, going to the doctors, and because I think a lot of people, I wonder if you've heard this, Rebecca, and people say, oh, well, it's all, it's all right, I'm not really sure. Like you said at the beginning, you weren't sure what it is, because of course being very tired, being irritable, it all kind of, you can kind of go, oh, that's because life's really busy at the moment or whatever. but actually that can be signs of menopause, and you might want to get that checked out. I wonder if there are any other thoughts that you have in terms of how to navigate that PhD journey.
With going through this. Well, I think firstly, I'd recommend anybody to have a look at the Balance app or the information that Louise Newson puts out, or the British Menopause Society. That's a really helpful resource. I know a lot of universities have got menopause policies now. So I'd looked at that for my university. The university I was at had done a lot of research on menopause at work. But it's only useful if you want to say, I've got this problem, which I was clearly in the, I'm just going to keep this on the down low, and we'll just say it's women's problems and nothing else. I think in terms of navigating the PhD, if you are suffering, and in it also, I had prior to this kind of all of these sort of real flare up where I went to the GP, I'd had frozen shoulder, which I didn't realise was not just related to sitting at your computer. It can be something that happens when you're going through the menopause, which is really interesting because
there's so much. There are so many other things that you wouldn't even think would be to do with menopause, which are
So I would be making a diary, and the Balance app is really useful for that, looking at the resources that are available, talking to your friends about it. I was saying to Emma before we started that I've become the menopause expert.
I love it.
My friends, which I've always been the youngest, and now I'm the oldest and the menopause expert. But we used to have a Monday walk, and we just talk about how it was all going for us and what we were experiencing, and I found that really helpful. Taking walks and having your people, as you've so rightly suggested. And I think because people join the PhD at different stages of life, even though education PhDs tend to be older, they weren't necessarily as old as me or in the menopause situation. So I didn't find that I had great sort of allies there massively, but I had a lot of friends similar age that I could chat to, and it was good to just talk about that and not talk about the PhD at the same time, if you know what I mean. Because
absolutely,
because your PhD friends, that's what they talk about. I increased exercise. I looked at my diet, so I tried to take a really holistic approach to it, which isn't easy, because I think when you're going through the PhD, you're so stressed about getting finished. You're constantly being judged, yet you feel like you've lost yourself when you're in the menopause. So you've got that challenge. I think depending on your topic, that can also be challenging. And just for me, I'm not a morning person, so I found that really hard, being in I'll call it a proper job in inverted commas, where they expect you to write lit reviews at 9 a.m. I just can't do it. So I'm a night person, and I found that working when it works for you is better. For the outputs, for the PhD outputs, the writing outputs. I also found going on little writing retreats on my own away was absolutely brilliant. And getting out of the house and going to the library pre-COVID, any library was like a real treat as well. And kind of it's that, because I think your mental space is taken over, and it's quite stressful being in the menopause. So if you can just go somewhere else where it's a bit different, I found that really helpful.
A really good tip, that. I think that alone time becomes really important, doesn't it?
Yeah, and walking in nature was a really big thing. I think I put in loads of steps, and that's something I've missed now. I'm in a proper job. is the getting out in nature, and kind of, if you sat there, brain fog was another thing that I didn't discuss, that we discussed earlier. The brain fog is so intense sometimes that you sat at a screen, and I know everyone suffers with the blank screen, but it did seem to intensify. And it's just, you get up from that screen and you think, okay, well, I've sat here for an hour, it's really not working, I'm going for a walk, and you come back and you mull over what you maybe wanted to write and how you might order it, and then you come back fresh. And I found allowing myself the guilt's always there with the PhD, but allowing yourself just to go out, or if I'd written something difficult, I had a lot of difficult topics to cover, unexpectedly difficult. If I'd written somebody's narrative story, for example, and thought, gosh, I just feel really sad, I would go out for a walk and just process it and get myself a coffee and maybe have a cake occasionally.
Cake.
Yeah. So
you've got to love a cake. You've got to love a cake. And I think this sense of looking after yourself is coming through really strongly. And I think this is always important. It's always important to look after yourself. But in this particular moment where it's such a transformational time, you're coming into just a whole new relationship with yourself in the menopause. And I think then it becomes incredibly important to take care of yourself and be attentive to your own rhythms, and doing the best you can with that. And eating cake is always good.
And not too much. Occasional cake.
No, I know. I know.
And I'm really lucky. I've got a very supportive family. My husband does all the cooking, so I can't massively complain. I had all of that, and I know, a lot of my friends maybe don't have that, and so I do feel really grateful. And I was really lucky with my GP.
Yes.
And so I just try to be an advocate for my friends now where I can, and help them.
Yes. And I think what's brilliant having you here today talking about this is that sense of being an inspiration in terms of you can do this, you can manage this. And I think because I've been talking to lots of people recently who are really struggling with this, and it's like, well, I just don't think I can do it. And it might be that it just takes you longer, or you do it in a different way. But it's brilliant to have you here, Rebecca, going, I've done it. I did it. It's that, it happened. It's okay. You can get through. I'm aware of time, and I could talk to you for a very long time. And we're going to, just to say that we, as always, we'll have now I can't think of the word, you see, we will have all the information in the show notes, so people will be able to click through and get, if they don't know who Louise Newsom is, they'll find out very quickly. So we'll put all that in the show notes. And so we're just going to close now. I wonder if you've given us a lot of brilliant advice here. If there's one or two things that you just leave people with to take away.
Yeah, I think if you're in this situation and you're doing a midlife PhD, go to your doctor, seek help if you think you need it, and make a note of what's going on. You're not going crazy. And you can get through it. And then the second thing I'd say is just don't be hard on yourself if you're suffering with brain fog or you can't think of the word. Just put the X's. Somebody told me, put the X's if you can't think of the exact word and go back to it. Do you find and replace at a later stage, just to keep your writing flowing? And that's those are two kind of really good tips, along with all the others.
Brilliant advice. Put the X's in. I love that. That. Rebecca, thank you so much. Thank you for being so generous with your own story, and I wish you all the best with this new role that you're in. We were saying before we started, we might need another episode on that. So watch this space, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks.
And thank you all for listening.